And welcome everybody into a special episode of the Mind Sculptors. I'm your host, Callahan, and joining me is my wonderful co-host, Pongo. Pongo, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. It's good to be here as always.
Yeah. Before we get into the episode, just a quick reminder, make sure you go over to our Patreon page and subscribe if you can. We would greatly appreciate it. Subscription gets you access to our Discord server where you can interact with all of the Sculpty boys, as we call ourselves. Today we've got a great guest who is actually on our server. He's one really awesome guy. Somebody who really kind of encouraged me to get started with podcasting in general is Braden from cEDH Cast. Braden, how's it going?
Great. How are you doing?
Pretty good, actually. I'm had quite the week, but I'm pretty excited to get going. And today, so Braden, you're known for a series that you do called Greedy Keeps, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and so what is Greedy Keeps exactly, just to break it down for some people who might not know?
I bring people on who have played a deck or brewed a deck or are pretty knowledgeable about some archetype in the format, and we do a whole bunch of test hands and talk about the strategies in the deck, what kind of cards they play, why they play those cards, and then in the mulligans we go down and see what kind of strategies they use to get the best hands and the greediest hands they can possibly get.
Okay. Well, today we're going to do an episode of Keedy Greeps, which is 100% not what you do. It's not the same thing.
Sure.
It is, we're going to have somebody on, and we're going to look at a deck, and somebody who's built the deck knows a lot about it, maybe played it a bunch, and can really help us figure out what's going on, and then we'll look at mulligans and really kind of see what you want to be doing there. So, you know, like I said, it's different.
The main difference is that the Moxfield randomizer won't screw over all our guests.
Fair. Tough, but fair.
So today we're going to be looking at Braden's... this is one of your newer Korvold lists, isn't it? This was played in the last Time Twisted tournament, wasn't it?
So I didn't play the last Time Twisted. Yeah, I didn't play in the last Time Twisted tournament, but this is I think it's around that time. I made some changes based off of feedback I got from a few members of the Korvold community, and I tested out some cards that ended up just being straight gas, and also added cards from Commander Legends. So it's like a newer take on Korvold.
Okay. So just walk us through a couple things, because you know you did make some changes here. So as far as changes, what were the big changes you did with this?
So the biggest is, so there were a few changes, but I'd say the biggest one is Grinding Station. Mm-hmm. So Grinding Station is a 2-mana artifact. Whenever an artifact enters the battlefield, you untap it. Well, under your control. Actually, no, it's whenever it comes into play. Yeah, wow, that's insane. That's actually just nuts.
Yes, Grinding Station gets crazier every time you read it.
Yeah. Then you tap and sack an artifact, and target player puts the top 3 cards of their library into their graveyard. So that goes infinite with Honorable Breach super easily. You just play as a 0 or mana positive rock over and over again, decking yourself. And if you have a Korvold in play, you're going to be drawing a card each time you do that. So really quickly, you can get tons of advantage. You know, play your Praetor's Grasp someone's Thassa's Oracle, win the game. You can make tons of mana by just tapping your Mox Opal over and over again, or your Mana Crypt or your Soul Ring. And additionally, it's super powerful when you're storming off, because you can just be like, all right, I'll play this Talisman, tap the Talisman for mana, sack it, because you tap it in response to the ETB trigger. Then you mill yourself for 3, you draw a card. Oh, I hit a reanimation spell, I milled my Dockside. All right, I'll go off and win. That's kind of Magical Christmas Land, but a lot of times it works a lot like that. So it's really powerful.
Awesome. So you did that big change. I saw you have Wheel of Misfortune in this list. Mm-hmm. What has your experience been with Wheel of Misfortune?
So this deck's kind of interesting. It's like because you're like a Dockside deck before you're an Ad Nauseam deck, you can actually be a little bit more aggressive with your life total with Wheel of Misfortune. So Where some decks you can kind of get into this awkward spot where like everyone kind of knows that you just need to draw 7 and they'll pay like a relatively high amount of life. You can kind of match that, or at least like play along and be fair. I think Wheel of Misfortune is actually a surprisingly skill testing card, but it's been really powerful in my testing. It's pretty much only bad when an opponent has the nuts and you're trying to be disruptive, or when there's a Hull Breacher in play. That's about it. And Wheel of Fortune already is pretty bad with a Hull Breacher in play, so Wheel of Misfortune really has only lost its ability to be disruptive. And when we're wheeling in this deck, we're really just trying to draw 7 cards for 3 mana. We're not really trying to be that disruptive.
Okay. And then as far as... I think this is very interesting because this list looks very similar to the Jessica Timna farm list that is out there. And so what is the big advantage to running green over white in this? So
I think it's tutor density. So if you think of like who are the best 2 colors for tutoring out Dockside, it's green and red, right? Mm-hmm. You get your Worldly Tutors, your Eldritch Evolutions, your Finale of Devastations, and you get to play all those cards, which are just insane. Then you also get to play the Imperial Seals, the Vampiric Tutors, the Wishclaw Talismans. And so if you think Dockside's the best card in the format, which, that might be a hot take, but I think it's pretty high up there, and you want to like break Dockside, I think Jund is a good place to start if you just want to always have a Dockside in your starting hand. Korvold then lets you take advantage of that by saying, hey, even when I don't have an ad nauseum to like take advantage of this mana, I have this guy in the command zone that draws cards when I sacrifice treasures. So that's kind of the appeal of Korvold and being in Jund, is you kind of get some consistency and you get tutor density and you get a really cool card advantage engine in the command zone.
Okay.
The downside is that your breach lines get a little bit more awkward because you don't have silence. So you can't really use Wheel of Fortune as like a breach combo.
Okay. So when it comes to win cons in this list, what are some of the win cons in this?
Sure. So there's like, it depends on what you're asking. So if you're asking how do I make infinite treasures, there's quite a few ways. If you're asking how I end the game, there's really only like 3 ways I end the game. So the first one is I Praetor's Grasp my opponents to death by either repeatedly casting Praetor's Grasp until their decks are gone, using like Eternal Witness loops, or I steal their Thassa's Oracle, I play the Thassa's Oracle, have no deck, and then I win that way. Additionally, I have a Finale Devastation, so if I have infinite mana from Dockside, I can just make a Finale for 10 billion, attack all of my opponents with my dorks that have haste, and I win that way. Additionally, you can use like Deathrite Shaman, like the Gitrog lists do a lot of the time. Mm-hmm. Because you have Grinding Station, you can mill your opponent's decks so that you can, make sure they have enough instants and sorceries to grind them out.
Okay. Well, interesting. So this is a list that, has definitely exploded in popularity. You have a couple cards in the sideboard, specifically Seal of Fire and Tiber Sabertooth. What is that your maybe board, or what's going on there?
So if you're really scared of Opposition Agent and Hull Breacher, I think Seal of Fire is a really cool card. You can just play it out on turn 1, and it kind of acts like a stacks piece that says like, I dare you. If you want to play your Hull Breacher, get ready to get shocked. And then Tiber Sabertooth is kind of this interesting card where if you are running into a lot of graveyard hate, which is like a pretty reasonable answer to this deck, like, hey, you've seen a lot of Korvold in your meta, I think it's a good idea to be playing Grafdigger's Cage. Tiber Sabertooth lets us have a win condition that doesn't have to revolve around the graveyard, because if you look at the rest of our win conditions, they all do revolve around the graveyard. But in my experience, Tiber Sabertooth is actually a pretty bad card when we're trying to manually storm off, and Corpse Dance does a much better job at doing that. So I made the cut, Corpse Dance, for Tiber Sabertooth. But if I ever play in a metagame where I'm seeing a lot of graveyard hate, I think it's very reasonable to bring back in Tiber Sabertooth, either in exchange for Corpse Dance or just in addition to it.
Okay.
So.
Yeah. think that kind of is my questions. Pongo, what are your? Do you have any questions here?
Yeah, so I'm gonna ask this somewhat for the benefit of our audience. So obviously we just talked about how Temur Sabertooth is kind of like a notable exclusion from the main deck. Do you want to walk us through a little bit how you actually end up going infinite despite not having Temur Sabertooth in your deck?
Sure. So we have a few cards that actually get the job done. They mostly revolve around, if they're not involving Underworld Breach, I already mentioned the Grinding Station combo, but there's also a combo with Underworld Breach and Stitcher Supplier, where we play Culling the Weak. We Culling the Weak our Stitcher Supplier, which mills us for 6. When we play it and sack it, replay Stitcher Supplier, we make tons of mana. Doesn't make infinite mana, but that makes a lot of mana. So the rest of our infinite mana combos are all Dockside combos. So we have a few cards that that work with that, but the two big ones are Aghanim's Awakening and Corpse Dance. Both of them require a sack outlet. So with Corpse Dance, it's a reanimation spell for the top creature in your deck, or in your graveyard. So graveyard order does matter in this deck. And what you do, it has buyback too. So if your Dockside makes 5 mana, what you do is you can just play Dockside, reanimate Dockside with Corpse Dance, pay for the buyback, put it back in your hand, sack Dockside, replay Corpse Dance, bring back Dockside, sack Dockside. And as long as you're making 5 mana, you'll be mana neutral. And then once you're mana neutral, you can draw your deck if Korvold's in play, because every time you sack a treasure, you draw a card. And then you just need to find a Wishclaw Talisman to get to infinite mana, or maybe that can like feed you into one of your other combos. Wishclaw Talisman lets you just give an extra artifact to one of your opponents. So that's one of the ways. And the other way is using Aghanim's Awakening. So Aghanim's Awakening is a X black for a sorcery. Return from your graveyard to the battlefield any number of target creature cards that have different mana costs of X or less. So if you get Eternal Witness, Dockside, and a sack outlet creature, it has to be Viscera Seer to start. You can sack all 3 of those creatures and then bring them back. So if you make 7 mana off a Dockside, which sounds like a lot, but it's definitely not impossible. I've definitely won with this combo a few times. You can start generating infinite treasures, and then you just feed that into your Korvold. So there's also a breach line with Dockside with LED, where you play Dockside, you sack it to, let's say, Scrap Prospector, which is a creature that sacrifices goblins. You make a whole bunch of treasures, you sack them to draw cards, then you play your LED, which discards your hand, and now you'll end up with tons of mana, tons of cards in your graveyard, and Dockside and LED in your graveyard, and then you can just keep doing that. And you won't make infinite mana, but you'll make like an arbitrarily large amount of mana, as long as you make enough treasures.
Very nice. And just because I fully anticipate that we're going to get some questions about this on the video itself. So you've essentially deliberately chosen to forego having like a 2-card combo with Temur Sabertooth in favor of having 3-card combos. Do you want to walk us through kind of in an actual gameplay situation, how do you sort of bridge that, let's say, increased difficulty of assembling your combo, and what is the rationale for deciding to not have a 2-card combo?
That's a great question. So a lot of the times what this deck's trying to do is it's trying to play a Korvold and a Dockside on the same turn and then reanimate that Dockside. So that's why there's so many rituals, so that we can cast all of our rituals, then have enough mana floating that even if Dockside doesn't make 7 mana, we can still play Korvold, sack Dockside to Korvold, because Korvold has an ETB trigger where you sack a creature, a sack permanent. Then we have the reanimation spell in our hand, which is why we're on like 10 reanimation spells, reanimate the Dockside. Now we'll have some mana floating, we'll get 10 more, or not 10 more, but we'll get some amount more treasures, and now we're drawing tons and tons of cards. So that's the kind of the game plan, right? And so a lot of the time what ends up happening is we're playing a manual Storm deck where we're trying to piece together a whole bunch of cards in our deck to assemble some type of multi-card combo. So what this means is a lot of the time we'll find a tutor, right? And we'll have drawn like 20 other cards or 10 other cards. And so the tutor just needs to find either the Corpse Dance or the Sack Outlet or the Underworld Breach, right? And then if you get the Underworld Breach, then you can just, replay your removal spell that kills your dockside, that lets you reanimate your dockside. And so a lot of the time what you're doing is you're just chaining these spells together. And because of that, because you're seeing so many cards, and you have so many ways of recasting your tutors or doing all that, it actually becomes more important that the cards in your deck that are comboing are actually useful during the midpoint between having, a ton of resources and having very few resources. So, for example, if you have 3 mana left over after you've played your Korvold and your dockside and sacked your dockside, Temur Sabertooth is not very useful. But a Corpse Dance will be incredibly useful, because then you can get back your dockside, make tons of treasures, and start trying to dig deep and go off. So that's why a lot of the time we'd rather play these 3-card combos, because they're useful in bridging us from the point in the game where we're very resource light and going forward on turn 2 or turn 3 to that point later in the turn where we just have like so many resources it's very hard for us to lose. So I don't know if that was is that a good explanation?
Yeah. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Seems interesting.
Yeah. A lot of the time you're trying to like push this deck to be as fast as possible to get under interaction. And so it's about having a density of effects so that you don't have to like actually tutor for the reanimation spell. You just have to tutor for the dockside, or so that when you rip 3 off the top, the chances are very high that you'll hit like a reanimation spell or a tutor. Like if you have 3 treasures and you hit a vampiric tutor off the first treasure, you can then grab your reanimate dockside, then you get another spin at the wheel, and then once you hit your breach, then you can that's how a lot of the turns play out that you win, is you just like you get 3 chances to hit what you need, and you just need to have the density of spells that get you there when you see them.
There's certainly a trade-off when it comes to playing certain cards like Temur Sabertooth that may not necessarily help you while you're spinning your wheels, as you put it, but can kind of like smooth out your lines, and then obviously trying to maximize on the applicability and kind of the let's say like bridging or multiple purposes, the kind of versatility of the various pieces that you're running. So I can totally understand how that's an interesting direction to be exploring. I would have to personally see it in action to know whether or not that makes sense to me, but I can definitely understand the rationale you're going for.
It's one thing I found is it's like kind of made me feel less crazy is I've had a few people pick up the deck who I trust as like pretty competent players, and they'll kind of question a lot of these like strange choices, and then they'll play the deck and be like, oh, I see, like you get into this position a lot of the time where you have 2 mana up, there's a Korvold in play and a dockside in your graveyard, that's why you're on this reanimation spell that isn't that good. It's like, yeah, I just need the density. But
2 mana doesn't get you there with Corpse Dance, right? So you need the 3rd mana.
Oh yeah, sorry, I mean like Dance of the Dead is what I meant, sorry.
Oh,
the
sure.
names are all very similar. Yeah, because you see Dance of the Dead, you're like, oh, this is a 2 mana reanimation spell, it enters tapped, that's not great, but you just kind of need that kind of density of reanimation spells at a certain point. Or you may even see, hey, why don't you just play like a Razaketh, right? You're on all these reanimation spells, you're on Entomb, why not just have the redundancy of effects, so if something happens to your dockside, you can do it. And I had the same thoughts for a long time, and what I found is I lost more games to hitting a Razaketh off ad nauseum or hitting a Razaketh when I was just trying to dig for literally anything, then I had games where dockside was exiled,
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of the thought
Yeah,
process.
I mean, there's definitely something to be said about not being on Razaketh in a Turbo Novice list.
Yeah.
That makes total sense to me. But yeah, I think this is a very interesting list at the very, very least. I know that somebody played this list during Time Twisted, right?
It was a slightly different list.
Okay.
They had like a different name for it, and they were playing a few cards I'd cut. So I started this list out as Deco's list. I don't know if you guys are familiar with him, but he has a pretty popular list, which is called Demon Chain. And what I did is I started with that list and cut Food Chain and added like some more Storm, like cards like cards that are like similarly seen with like storm decks, but it honestly wasn't that different. And I just kept cutting cards that weren't useful in the game type of games I was playing. I have a certain play style, right? And so I was being aggressive with my deck, and I'd found that there were cards that weren't useful when I wasn't being aggressive, so I cut those cards. And so I feel like the list that was played at the Time Twisted event was sort of like was like forked at a different point in development, if that makes sense.
Right.
So there's a few cards there that like I figured out pretty quickly were not especially good anymore, that were still in there just because of the time in which it was forked.
Right. So you bring up your play style, and that's a great place to be. So basically what we're going to do here now is I'm going to throw you guys some 7-card hands, and you're going to tell me whether you would keep it, ship it, and in the rationale. So the first 7 that I've got for you is a 7 cards, obviously. Jessica's Will, Nature's Claim, Crop Rotation, Wooded Foothills, Cabal Ritual, Diabolic Intent, and Blood Crypt. So we'll start with Braden here. Braden, do you keep or ship this hand?
I ship it. There's no tutor for Dockside. There's no card advantage engine. There's Jessica's Will, but Jessica's Will's kind of awkward in this deck. It's really powerful after Korvold's resolved, and it's good in the late game if you just need to see 3 cards, but there really isn't there's no way to like try to win on turn 2 here, which is like, or 3, and that's like really what the deck wants to do, is it just wants to like jam it as quickly as possible, and this hand doesn't really do it. Okay.
Pongo, what do you think of it then?
Yeah, I tend to concur. If an opening hand doesn't have like Mana Crypt, Sol Ring, like Mana Vault, or a Jeweled Lotus, or like a Dockside Extortionist, I'm already kind of like beginning to doubt whether or not it's going to be good enough in a lot of situations. And this hand, not only does it have none of those really, really powerful cards that we really want to see in a deck like this, it also has like some serious tension with the Diabolic Intent not having a creature to sacrifice.
Yeah, right.
It's just kind of a little bit subpar, and it's a first 7, so let's ship it and see something a little bit more explosive.
Now, if this is, let's say, and I'll posit this to both of you guys, if you're on Mulligan 6, so you have to mold a 6. If this is where you have to put one on the bottom, are you keeping this and putting one on the bottom and rolling the dice, or are you keeping it?
I think I go to 5 every time.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. I agree. I'm going to 5.
I think that makes sense. Next hand, I think is a little bit better. It's City of Brass, Wheel of Misfortune, Polluted Delta, Talisman of Resilience, Exotic Orchard, Nature's Claim, Elves of Deep Shadow. Pongo, we'll start with you. What would you do with this hand?
So this is a second 7. I'm probably mulliganing this too, to be completely honest with you, on a second 7.
Yeah.
This hand does not seem substantially better to me. I mean, it is substantially better than the last hand because obviously it's got some less tension and it's actually got kind of a bit more of a game plan. I just don't think that game plan is quite strong enough for where I would want it to be on a 7-card hand.
Right.
I might keep this if I'm going much, much lower, but definitely feel like I can do better.
It's a decent 5.
Yeah,
maybe.
Exactly. I would probably consider keeping this on 5, but as a second 7, like I said, it doesn't have any of those cards that I named earlier. Right. And those are kind of like signpost cards for me, where if I see any of those, that's where I start getting interested in the hand.
Yeah, and one thing I will say about this deck is I actually don't find myself keeping a lot of hands where you just like play a turn to Korvold. So even just like a hand with a Soul Ring and a Mana Crypt, you still have to kind of question. Although at this point, if we're going down to 6, you're going to be a little bit more, free. You're going to be a little more lenient. But this hand doesn't quite do it for me.
Yeah, okay. Definitely the cards that I mentioned on their own don't necessarily make a hand, but they, combined with some other cards in hand are the types of things that I'm looking for.
Yeah.
Okay.
It doesn't take much more beyond those cards, is what I'm saying.
That's fair. So now we're going down to 6. And so the 7 on the 6 is Badlands, Birds of Paradise, LED, Necromancy, Finhorn Elves, Slaughter Pact, and Bloodstained Mire. What are we doing on this? We'll start with Braden.
Can you read it back to me again? I was like listening for a green source that entire time, and I
Yeah, start with the lands.
So the lands are Bloodstained Mire and Badlands. Your creatures are Birds of Paradise, Finhorn Elves. You have an LED, a Necromancy, and a Slaughter Pact.
At 6, I think I'm probably gonna get a little bit greedy here. There's just no tutor and no source of card advantage. We don't even have a turn 2 Korvold, which is like already on the kind of questionable. But it's like a turn 3 Korvold, which is just not good. If you, I don't know. I have no reason to think my opponents are gonna like just turn 1 Entomb Dockside. But if you expect them to do that for some reason, well, the Necromancy is kind of cute. But
to be clear, there is a turn 2 Korvold there off the LED.
Oh, you're right, off the LED, but then you're discarding your hand.
Yeah.
I'm not a huge fan of that either.
It's not a great place to be.
Yeah, I would throw this one back too.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to 5 as well, for pretty much all the same reasons that Braden mentioned.
Okay, so we're going down to 5. This starting 5, and we'll start with Pongo. And here's the lands. We've got 2 fetches with Misty Rainforest and Verdant Catacombs, a Bayou, Forbidden Orchard, Finale of Devastation, LED again, and Mox Diamond. In Pongo, what are you doing here?
On 5, I think I'm kind of required to keep this hand. It does have some desirable traits. Obviously, we have like a Mox Diamond, which is nice. 4 lands, not great, but like we're bottoming lands, I think, almost every time. And then the finale is a Dockside Extortionist, so I like that. We're pretty close. Like it won't take a lot to get like a turn 2 Dockside or a turn 3 Dockside, something like that. So on 5, I think there's a pretty reasonable chance I'm keeping and bottoming maybe just a couple of lands here, and hoping to top deck something.
I think I bottomed the Forbidden Orchard and the LED. I think that's probably right. That way you have 3 lands and a finale, and you just hope you hit like an Elvish Spirit Guide off the top or something, so you can get a turn 2 Dockside.
Yeah, that's an interesting consideration. I think that's really the only consideration with this hand, is whether or not you bottom 2 lands and like hope to draw your second land for turn, or you bottom the LED and just rely on having 2 lands for sure. And I don't know. I think at 5 I'm more tempted to get greedy and hope that I top deck a land in my first 2 draws.
Yeah, I guess the way I see it, like I just got burnt today actually keeping an LED over something else. And although LED is really sick with Korvold because it is a cantrip, so you actually can like set up some really cool stuff with top deck tutors, where you cast your top deck tutor and then crack your LED to draw the card, make the mana. I think especially in starting hands, LED can leave a little bit to be desired. Of course, if we just crack like an Underworld Breach off the top, we're just in Magical Christmas Land, we start doing broken stuff. But I think I want to make sure I have 2 lands in play on turn 2, and the high point is that I just hit like a mana vault off the top, and I get to get a Dockside out on turn 2 with mana up and slam Korvold, draw some cards, hit something gas. Although having the LED would be really useful to have after the finale resolves if I do hit acceleration. So it's definitely hard. If you can go somehow turn 2 Dockside with an LED in play, holy smokes, that's nuts. Because then you can just you have nothing left in hand, you crack it. So it's hard to say.
I think that this hand is not so busted where I feel kind of like I have a certain amount of pressure to have to top deck something that is going to bring the plan together. And if I keep 2 lands here and I just, draw lands, I feel like my chance of winning the game is super, super low. So I would much rather sort of bank on
you would be
finding a land, right?
If you bottom LED in a land, you're keeping 3 lands.
Which one of them you're pitching. Yeah.
Right.
So it's basically I think I win if I hit gas. Like if I hit straight gas off the top in a row, I win. I think if I don't, I lose. Like if I just hit 2 lands off the top, no matter what I bottom, I think we lose, right? Like if I just draw 2 lands in a row, we're dead. But if if I keep the 2 lands and then hit like a Mana Vault and like a Tutor, I think we're like in a really good spot.
Well,
that's probably true either way. But
yeah, so I mean, you can still find non-land mana sources off the top, right? And in that position, I think you still want to have fewer lands.
That's true.
So I mean, yeah, it's really, again, how greedy do you want to get? I do think that in the first 2 draws, I tend to expect to find a second land here. Although,
yeah, that's fair.
Certainly within like 3 draws, I typically anticipate to find a land.
Yeah, and we are on 30 lands technically because we have the modal DFC. So maybe that's fair that we just bottom 2 lands and expect to get there.
Right, and in 7 cards, you typically get like 2.1 lands or something like that. So I mean, I typically think that in 3 draws, I find a land based on that. I don't know that the math actually works out that way, especially because you're bottoming a certain amount of lands as well, which skews the ratios. But I still do think that, you're fairly likely, if not to find a land, then to find like a Spirit Guide or a Mana Rock or something like that. The deck plays not just 30 lands technically, but also a lot of mana sources. So I think a significant amount of the time you're going to top deck a mana source.
Yeah, actually, I think the best argument here for bottoming a land, 2 lands, is that if you hit a Dork off the top, you have a turn 2 finale with an LED in play, and that's just insane.
Right.
And that's super likely. So yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right here.
It's certainly a question of how risk averse you want to be.
Yeah.
Well, you are playing Korvold, so you're kind of playing like this all-in deck, right? So I mean, if you're playing this deck, being afraid of the risk is probably not. You probably shouldn't play this deck, right? Like there is a good deal. Like this deck. Like how well does this deck grind?
That's an interesting question. That's a very difficult question to answer because it has the tools and the abilities to grind insanely well. But really, what it does is if it gets an opportunity to grind at all, it usually just wins. So it's like it's so explosive that if you really let it draw 3 cards, it can usually just start going for it and start leaning into it. Mm-hmm. And so it grinds well in that if you have like 3 treasures in play in a Korvold, like that's a lot of the way there.
Yeah, Korvold draws a ton of cards, and when all of your cards are super explosive gas or essentially something that is going to allow you to start chaining and triggering Korvold more, then yeah, it makes sense that while you do theoretically have this grind plan where yes, Korvold is drawing you cards, it's not going to take too much in terms of critical mass to get going.
I will say one of the goals for this deck, like one of the things this deck does really well that I'm really impressed by it, is that we're not on a few cards that are explosive that people commonly see, like Orcish Lumberjack. But Orcish Lumberjack has this strange effect where like it can sometimes end up with you having like 2 permanents in play, where one's a Korvold and one's a land. And I don't particularly like that because often the deck tries to win every turn. Like every turn, it can kind of like, as it tries to win, it usually draws cards. Just thanks to the way the deck is constructed, like Korvold draws you cards as you go for it. And so often it gets to this point where it has like a moment of weakness where, hey, do you have the counterspell or not? If they have it, you don't win. But you just drew like 5 cards on your way to that point of weakness. And so the next turn you can start to set something up again. And often like turns 2, 3, and 4 or 3, 4, and 5, you're gonna be able to like go for it or at least threaten such powerful spells that they have to be answered, which I really enjoy.
That's interesting. I would think that in a lot of situations you'd be pretty happy to sacrifice 1 land to the Lumberjack and then like theoretically just sacrifice the Lumberjack after you power out Korvold.
I thought, I've had a lot of people like talk to me about that, and it's kind of mixed. Like Libertas, who's been picking up the deck lately, and I've been really happy to talk to about the deck. He was also very skeptical of that too, and he played a couple of games with Lumberjack, and I think he came out of it feeling pretty similarly to me. There's just a lot of games where like you kind of just go for it on turn 2, and then they kind of have a counterspell, but then on turn 3 you get to like reanimate a Dockside or something and kind of start threatening it again. And Lumberjack makes it a lot harder because you'll end the turn with like just a land in play, where the deck is able to like threaten. Usually what the deck does is it threatens a couple wins in a row and then it kind of runs out of gas. So And Lumberjack kind of makes that more difficult in my experience. It's just
Interesting. Shall we move on to another hand?
Yeah.
sure.
Let's go to the next 7, since we decided we're going to keep that. I'm going to spare you the one that just came up. It was a no-land hand with no artifacts in it, so figured I would save us that. This one, it looks a little bit more interesting. It's got 2 lands, which is Swamp and Emergent Zone, Demonic Tutor, Dark Ritual, Tinderwall, Wheel of Fortune, and Pyroblast. So, Braden, what's your thought on this 7?
This seems sick. It really depends. You said there was a talisman, right?
No, it was a Tinderwall.
A Tinderwall? Yeah, this is a really interesting hand. I guess there's a couple ways you could sequence this, right? You could sequence it so that you go turn 1 Ritual DT, get Dockside, pass turn. There's also turn 1 Tinderwall, pass, turn 2 Dark Ritual, DT.
Just, Braden, before you get ahead of yourself on that, I don't believe there's a green source in this hand.
There's
is
not.
there not? Oh, okay.
It's Emergent Zone and a Swamp are your 2 mana sources.
Oh, that's really awkward.
Yeah, that was my thought. Because you're pretty much required to DT for, theoretically another colored mana source. Or, you hope to top deck it, right? And if you top deck it, then you're feeling really good.
Yeah. And then, you can always on turn 2, like, tutor for... Yeah, that's interesting. It's hard because I can't see the hands, and I'm very much a visual thinker. So it's hard for me to, like, visualize these hands. So, yeah, it's... I'm not sure. Do you mind reading it to me one more time?
Yeah, here. I'm going to see if I can just send it. No, I can't. Damn. So it's Emergent Zone, Swamp. Those are your 2 lands. Demonic Tutor, Dark Ritual, Tinderwall, Wheel of Fortune, and Pyroblast.
If you hit any type of mana source, you can kind of you can be really aggressive here. Because then you can find a red source for Dockside, or you can find if you either have a red source for Dockside, so you can find Dockside, or you can always just wheel. I don't know. Is this our first 7 or second 7?
This is our first 7.
This is, right. First.
I don't know. I think I might throw it back. I might be greedy. I honestly have a hard time picking. What do you think, Pongo?
I think on a first 7, I'm inclined to throw it back. It's just like there is a certain amount of risk, and we haven't mulliganed at all yet. So I think on a first 7, I'm more likely to be risk averse. Whereas when you get down to 5, that's when I start playing a little bit more greedily, and I start to,
that's fair.
Theoretically keep 1-landers and stuff like that.
Yeah. The awkward part here is that it's. Oh, wait. Ooh. Okay. There is one line. You can go. So here is one thing you should think about. If you just play this out and you don't even get anything nuts, if you draw a green, you can go on turn 3. You can turn 1 land, turn 2 DT, turn 3. If you've hit a green source, you can now go Tinderwall, Dark Ritual, Necropotence, and now during your end step, you can win with Necropotence because you have an Emergent Zone.
Yeah, so there's a lot of good top decks with this hand, right? Any land is pretty good here. So I wouldn't necessarily fault someone for keeping it. It would be, in my opinion, a fairly greedy keep because you are definitely hoping to top deck your next colored mana source, I think, turn 1. You can get there turn 2 and still cobble something together, but it's not really the time frame you're hoping for things to occur on in that case.
I do think a turn 3 win with Necropotence is it's not bad at all, especially with mana up for Final Fortune. I think I would keep this because there's the upside is okay. So best case scenario, you just hit the red source, or like a taiga. Best case scenario, you just hit a taiga, and now you can just DT for Dockside, and then worst case scenario, you just DT for Necropotence and win on turn 3.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
For me, I think the the set of like cards that I would need to draw into with this hand, it becomes a fair bit smaller. Especially if we compare it to the last 5 that we kept, where essentially like any mana source, even a non-land mana source, was okay. Here we're really reliant on finding a green source or a red source. So that,
I will say that we do win on turn 3, with no. So if we draw a red source, we win on turn 3 with protection because we have Pyroblast. And then if we, it's even crazier if we get the Tinderwall too. That's also crazy. But I think this is actually a keep. I'm gonna change to a solid keep now that I've realized that we can just DT for Necropotence.
Okay. And Pongo, are you still a ship or?
Well, so if we're DTing for Necropotence on turn 2, then we're casting it on turn 3 with like not really much mana available. So I don't know. I find that still like it's going to be a fairly rough line to actually pull off. Still fairly reliant on some specific draws, if I'm understanding correctly, at least.
We just have to. So we have to. If the Necropotence. So one thing I like about Necropotence is a lot of the time people will not counter the Dark Ritual because they'll think, I'm just going to counter the Adnaz, or I'm just going to counter the Korvold or something like that, or they just don't counter the Dark Ritual a lot of the time. And then a lot of time they don't think I tutored for Necropotence. It's also what happens a lot of the time. So especially if I just DT'd and then the next turn I play Dark Ritual, I feel like people are definitely going to think I'm going to be playing an Adnaz, and then they'll just counter the Adnaz. And so if I have the Immersion Zone in play and I just have to hit a land off the top 2, and if I hit a red source I have protection, even if I don't hit a land off the top 2, I just have to hit either of my Spirit Guides with the Necropotence to be able to activate the Emergence Zone. So I feel like a lot of times Necropotence plays really well into people's interaction. It is a non-creature spell, so it gets hit by Guardianship, but it doesn't get hit by Flusterstorm or Dispel or Miscast or any of those spells, or it gets hit by Swan Song. So that's why I'm comfortable here. I really like, one thing I like about this deck is that Dockside and Korvold and Breach and Necropotence, they all dodge a sizable amount of the interaction in the format. Not all of it, not even the majority of it probably, but enough of it that it does matter. And I like this hand.
Okay.
I think we have some really cool lines where we just like play a turn 2 Dockside, if which might be good enough. Or if we don't get lucky, we can always just play the turn 2 Necropotence.
Sweet.
Turn 3 Necropotence.
Oh, it's turn 3. Sorry, I was misspoke.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty much all we got. Again, thanks for coming on, Braden. If people want to find you in cEDH Cast, how can they find you?
Yeah, so we're on YouTube and Twitter and Spotify and a lot of other cool places. If you listen to podcasts somewhere, however you're listening to this podcast or video, we're also there probably, just at cEDH Cast. So yeah, check us out. We on Monday, I don't know when this video is coming out, Monday the 7th, I think, of December, we have a video coming out that's going to be a Greedy Keeps for Mirren of the Clan of Toth with Alan of Mental Misplays and Ramp Gang. And I'm probably doing a video with someone this week about a single card, because now we're doing those two. So
yeah,
it'll be fun.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us, and thank you, the listeners, for joining us as well. Again, a reminder that if you want to support the show, help us keep the lights on and keep doing what we're doing, go over to our Patreon page, where there you can become a patron, hang out with Braden in the Discord server of ours, because that is how you get access to the Discord server. So head over there. It's pretty cheap, and then you can get access to that and hang out with us. So with that, thank you all for joining us, and we will see you next time.